policy for our nation, and we're asking every single member of Congress to understand clearly and see this for what it is. It is a jobs protection bill. Madam Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my friend from Texas for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may commit.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, it's been a remarkable April in the House of Representatives. Last week, the majority rewrote the Constitution with a bill stating that one House of Congress can deem a law made all by itself, regardless of what the Senate or the President of the United States might think. And if that wasn't enough, today the majority is proposing to rewrite the laws of science itself, the definition of taxes, and the laws of economics. Despite indisputable scientific evidence, the Republicans are seeking to bar the Environmental Protection Agency from protecting Americans' health and safety from what the scientific consensus agrees is the worst environmental threat in world history, global climate change. It's akin to telling Homeland Security to stop protecting the homeland. It denies scientific proof and logic. Even the Supreme Court stated that the EPA has a responsibility to act to keep the public safe. We're witnessing nothing less today than a full assault on 4 decades of progress in protecting Americans from environmental dangers. Madam Speaker, for nearly 40 years, the EPA and the Clean Air Act have protected the health of Americans from dangers both seen and unseen. Over the last 20 years, the Clean Air Act prevented an estimated 843,000 asthma attacks, 18 million cases of respiratory illness among children, 672,000 cases of chronic bronchitis, 21,000 cases of heart disease, and 200,000 premature deaths, not only saving people from the human toll of dealing with illness among themselves and their family, but saving the economic cost to society and individuals from all of these conditions. Yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to ignore this progress and prevent the EPA by handcuffing it and preventing it from protecting us in the future. Repealing the EPA's authority to limit pollution would have devastating consequences. It would increase the number of children and adults who suffer from asthma. It would increase the number of individuals with emphysema, lung cancer, bronchitis, and many other respiratory diseases, driving up health care costs for all Americans significantly. For this reason, 280 groups, including the American Heart Association, the American Public Health Association, and many others, sent a letter to Congress urging us to reject measures that would block or delay the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency from doing its job to protect all Americans from life-threatening air pollution. Madam Speaker, my friend from Texas mentioned the word tax 6 times in his remarks, to my count. It's possible I missed a couple instances of that word as well. And yet yesterday in committee, both Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Waxman agreed that the EPA does not have the statutory authority to confer any taxes whatsoever. Therefore, the name of this bill, the Energy Tax Prevention Act, is a complete misnomer. This bill has not even originated in or been passed out of the committee in Congress that has jurisdiction in tax matters, namely the Ways and Means Committee. It's a completely inappropriate and misleading way to convey what this bill does. Madam Speaker, America's science and environmental policy should be driven by science and science alone. The EPA should be allowed to move forward, and I urge my colleagues to reject the rule in the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Beaumont, Texas, the gentleman, Judge Poe.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, the EPA is on a mission to destroy American industry. Their damaging plan to regulate the so-called carbon emissions will cost every household in America at least $1,600 per year. These unnecessary regulations will strangle the economy by driving up the cost of energy. Gasoline is $4 a gallon, will soon be $5 a gallon. And it will put more Americans out of work, especially in the energy industry. Congress must take immediate action to stop the EPA and its out-of-control concepts from ruining American industry. Earlier this year, I introduced similar legislation to what we are considering today. I introduced it during the first CR. It passed this House with a bipartisan support, and what it would do is similar to what this legislation is going to do. That would be to prevent the EPA's attempt to regulate so-called greenhouse gases. I support this rule and the underlying legislation. Madam Speaker, in my opinion, when regulators, especially those at the EPA, go to work every day, they go down the street here to one of these marble palaces, they get in a big room with a big oak table, they drink their lattes, and they sit around and say, who can we regulate today? Because that's what regulators do. Regulators regulate. And they figure out new ways to regulate the entire United States, all on the so-called premise of protecting us from ourselves. In my opinion, it has nothing really to do about protection, but it has to do about power. The EPA has a power agenda, and they have a political agenda, and they are trying to claim it is an agenda to protect all of us from ourselves. The EPA's regulation of greenhouse gases, in my opinion, lacks proven scientific basis, and the EPA is out of control. And at this time, I'd like unanimous consent to introduce a letter or an article from the Wall Street Journal dated January 4th that's entitled, "The EPA is at War with Texas."
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Perfect example of how the EPA is not only at war with Texas, but at war with the American energy system. You know, the EPA overregulates, and it's driving businesses, energy businesses, out of this country. It's hammering the American energy industry, and I doubt whether or not it is doing so with scientific basis. The United States is in an energy crisis. It's a national security issue. And what is the administration's energy plan? Well, let's not drill here. Let's not drill there. We can't drill in Anwar. We can't drill in any new lands in the United States. We're certainly not going to promote permitting in the Gulf of Mexico at a rapid pace so that we can drill there. But our energy plan, saith the administration, is to send money down to Brazil and let the Brazilians drill off of their coast so we can buy their crude oil. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's time for us to drill in the United States safely. It's time for America to take care of America, and that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, before I begin, I had a parliamentary inquiry to the Speaker.
State his inquiry.
Madam Speaker, when making decisions on a bill referral, is the bill title a consideration?
The gentleman is asking for an advisory opinion, and the chair cannot respond to that at this time.
Further parliamentary inquiry,
Gentleman will stay.
Is it true that anyone can put the word tax in the title of a bill, even though it has nothing to do with taxes?
The gentleman's inquiry has not been stated in a proper fashion.
Well, Madam Speaker, let me turn, if I could, to my good friend on the Rules Committee for purposes of yielding to a question, if he would.
I welcome the gentleman.
I was just curious. I had an amendment before the Rules Committee. I noticed you waived germaneness and other questions. I had an amendment that submitted that would simply ensure that the bill accurately accomplished what its title described. My amendment would have struck everything in the bill except the title, Energy Tax Prevention Act, and replaced it with language that actually prevented the EPA from imposing an energy tax. Do you have any guidance as to why this amendment was not in order?
I appreciate the gentleman engaging me in a colloquy, and I'll just give him a straight answer. We did not offer any waivers. All 12 amendments offered by Democrats were germane. This, and perhaps others, that were submitted to the Rules Committee were not germane to the House rules, and so we did not offer any waiver. But the others that we did, the 12, were all germane and did not have to have a waiver.
Reclaiming my time, I would just note that the committee did deal with germaneness in terms of allowing things to go through from the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's unfortunate that you would not allow an amendment to at least have an accurate title before the chamber for its debate. It's clear that H.R. 910 has nothing to do with energy taxes. The bill is designed to confuse members of Congress and mislead the public. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee, I would strongly object to EPA imposing a tax on energy. But we all know that the EPA has no intention of imposing a tax on energy. Instead, this bill will overrule the scientific consensus on climate change, ignore a Supreme Court decision.
3 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Ignore a Supreme Court decision and endanger the future of the planet. I would strongly urge a no vote on the rule and the underlying bill. I would also urge defeat, and I just would say, Madam Speaker, I would ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement from the Joint Committee on Tax that indicates that this bill has nothing to do with taxation.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. You know, at this time, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to one of our brand new freshmen, a gentleman who is not only on what is called an A committee, but an exclusive committee of the United States Congress, a distinguished career as a sheriff in Florida, and a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Nugent.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Dallas, Mr. Sessions. Today I rise in support of House Rule 203 and the underlying legislation, H.R. 910. When I talk to people in Florida's 5th District about what we're doing here in the House of Representatives to cut spending, reduce the size and scope of the federal government, I always stress that we're just one part of the process. The House can only do so much. We still need the Senate and the President to sign off on any legislation we pass before it becomes law. This is one of the most basic building blocks of our government, and one we're reminded as we continue to wait on the Senate to pass a budget for this fiscal year and to prevent a government shutdown. But the Obama administration has decided to bypass Congress on the issue of greenhouse gas. Can't pass cap and tax? Push the greenhouse agenda on the American people another way. So now, unelected bureaucrats in the EPA are trying to regulate greenhouse gases. Among the gases the EPA is trying to regulate is methane. According to EPA, 28% of the global methane emissions they classify as coming from human-related activities actually come from livestock. I don't think it's a coincidence that the EPA's move to regulate methane, including cow flatulence, comes on the heels of a report from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization that states livestock are one of the most significant contributors to today's most serious environmental problems. Urgent action is required to remedy the situation, unquote. Now, I'm pretty sure if you ask the ranchers of Florida's 5th District, as much as they'd like to regulate cows from passing gas, for plenty of reasons, some smellier than others, we just don't have that capacity. Nevertheless, EPA wants to follow the UN's lead and regulate methane. And the cost of that will inevitably fall upon the backs of Americans' families. Madam Speaker, H.R. 910 is a good and important bill.
Gentleman's time's expired.
I'll give gentleman an additional minute.
Similarly, the rule provided by H.Res. 203 gives us time for a full, comprehensive debate on the issue, and I encourage my colleagues to support them both. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Yield myself a minute to respond.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. I know the gentleman from Florida mentioned the cow flatulence in our committee meeting last night, and it sounded like a topic that bore looking into. I did have the chance to look it up in the interim, and the Fox News had reported the prospect of EPA regulating cow and livestock gas. However, it never existed. Factcheck.org, which I looked it up on, dispelled the myth, and the EPA itself actually came out with a statement that said not only is there no such regulation that is discussed or was in the works, but even the EPA admitted it's not under their authority to regulate that in any way, shape, or form. So it is a false accusation with regard to the issue with regard to livestock, and Madam Speaker, it's my honor to yield 2 minutes to a former member of the Rules Committee and a former member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He's racked up quite a few former memberships. The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh.
Gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, today's legislation is essentially about the very simple sounding act of abolishing the Clean Air Act. Why? How is it that we're going to do this? The authors and supporters of this legislation have come to the legislative conclusion that global warming is a hoax. Give them credit. Coming to that conclusion was a big lift. It flies in the face of the unanimous conclusion of American scientists, 97%, that global warming is real and it's man-made. And you know, when you're going to get to that conclusion, you have to follow a long-established tradition we humans have, and that's the ability to disregard the obvious and the proven when that conflicts with what our ideology says we want. You know, Aristotle was the EPA of his day. He was attacked when he said that the earth was round. The world at that time thought the world was flat. And people argued with Aristotle and about Aristotle for 1,500 years. Galileo became the EPA of his day when he said that the earth revolved around the sun. He too was attacked for centuries for being, quote, wrong. Today we have unanimous, near unanimous scientific conclusion that global warming exists. It's a threat to our planet. It's a threat to our health. And yet, as the folks who attacked Aristotle when he said the earth was round, as the folks who attacked Galileo said when he said the earth revolved around the sun, the authors and supporters of this legislation deny the proven fact of global warming and wave it away by abolishing the Clean Air Act. This is the wrong step to be taking. I yield back.
Gentleman from Vermont yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, there was a dialogue back and forth about cattle, and that the EPA really is not after that issue. But if you go to the EPA website, epa.gov, and you look under the portions called Frequent Questions, where it deals with livestock, in fact, this EPA is trying to talk about methane produced by livestock. And it ends up saying, as I read from my BlackBerry, that essentially 20% of all the methane content in the air comes from livestock. Well, that's what they want to go regulate, which means they would get into this, whether we said to this or not.
Will the gentleman yield?
The gentleman will have his own time in a minute. I'm sure he'll be very effective, but I encourage him to get on his BlackBerry and go to the website and look this up. They're going to blame it on cattle. They're going to tax cattle. They're going to tax the output because that's what they're proposing. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Ennis, Texas, the gentleman, Mr. Barton.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman to ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this rule and in strong support of the underlying bill. I have been a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee for 26, now 27 years. I'm a past chairman. I'm a past subcommittee chairman. I'm currently have the title of Chairman Emeritus. I participated under former Chairman John Dingell, former Chairman Billy Tozan, former Chairman Tom Bliley, former Chairman Henry Waxman, and now current Chairman Fred Upton. Dozens of hearings on the Clean Air Act, markups, amendments, dozens of hearings on climate change, global warming, and all of those issues. The bill before us, if the rule passes, does not change the Clean Air Act. It does not gut the Clean Air Act. It does not in any way prevent enforcement of the criteria pollutants that are regulated by the Clean Air Act. It simply says that greenhouse gases are not to be regulated under the Clean Air Act. And the reason that it says that is that greenhouse gases are different than the criteria pollutants that are regulated under the Clean Air Act. First of all, greenhouse gases by definition are necessary for life. As I stand here, Madam Speaker, and speak, I am creating, as I breathe in and out through the respiratory process, CO2. So under the dictates of today's EPA, I am a mobile source polluter because I am breathing. I am creating CO2. CO2, carbon dioxide, is necessary for life. Greenhouse gases are necessary to protect the environment. They have the ability to prevent heat from escaping into outer space, and that is what creates the temperature zone that allows life to exist. The radical environmentalists who think CO2 is a pollutant have decided amongst themselves, I don't know how they've done it, but they decided that the magic number for CO2 in the atmosphere should be about 350 parts per billion. We're currently about 380 parts per billion. We know from records and from ice samples and tree rings and things like this of the past that we've had CO2 up in the thousands of parts per billion in the past. So how 350 has become the magic number is beyond me. In any event, let me simply say the bill before us doesn't change one sentence in the Clean Air Act. It does say that the endangerment finding that I think was flawed and the decision by the Obama administration to regulate CO2 under the Clean Air Act is wrong and should not be allowed to stand. If this Congress or future Congresses want to regulate CO2 or want to regulate greenhouse gases, let them bring a bill forward through the normal regulatory process and do it. Please vote for the rule. Please vote for the bill.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, it's hard to figure out where to start with regard to refuting some of the statements that were made. First of all, again, with regard to the information regarding methane emissions on the EPA website, there's a difference between a statement of fact and an action. And part of what the EPA does is it provides good scientific facts. EPA itself concedes and says they don't have the authority, nor should they have the authority, to monitor emissions from livestock. So they will publish good information. I don't refute the information the gentleman said, and I hope they publish more useful information about the impact of livestock, but they are not seeking to regulate it. The gentleman said they're going to tax cattle. Again, very clearly, Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Waxman said the EPA does not have the ability to impose a tax. I would ask my colleague from Texas a simple yes or no question. Does the EPA have the ability to impose a tax?
A tax is a burden.
Reclaiming my time. It's a simple yes or no question. If there's an additional statement the gentleman would like to make, I'd be happy to have him explain it on his own time. My time is limited and I have many speakers, but I would be happy to enter a dialogue with him on his time or allow him to respond to whether or not the EPA has the ability to impose a tax. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We spend a lot of time these days talking about costs. Cost of regulation, cost of repeal, cost of implementation. Conveniently missing from this discussion are the human costs, lives lost, those altered by heart attacks, asthma, and brain damage due to fine particulate matter in our air and mercury in our water. My hometown of Chicago knows this all too well. Chicago ranks second among all cities in the country adversely affected by power plant pollution. Two particularly egregious emitters, the Fisk and Crawford power plants, emit fine particulate matter that directly contribute to 41 deaths, 550 ER visits, and 2,800 asthma attacks annually. EPA estimates that fine particulate pollution from power plants shorten the lives of 1,356 people from my home state each year. Talk about cost. In 2001, the Harvard School of Public Health put out an Illinois power plant study. In the 8 years since these harms were modeled and publicized, the Environmental Law and Policy Center estimates the continued Fisk and Crawford coal plant pollution has caused from $750 million to $1 billion in health and environmental-related damages. Even if you don't care about global warming and you don't believe climate change is man-made, you can't argue with these numbers. So if you want to talk costs, let's talk costs. Fisk and Crawford power plants cost Chicagoans 550 ER visits per year. They cost Chicagoans 2,800 asthma attacks per year, and Fisk and Crawford power plants cost Chicagoans 751 to billion in only 8 of the 50-plus years we've been collecting data on these pollutants. The answer to these costs is not to repeal the law that cleans our air, that protects our children, and allows us to remain competitive in the global market. The answer instead is to transition away from the antiquated and outdated industry that pollutes and toward green infrastructure that encourages domestic economic development. I urge my colleagues to oppose the rule and H.R. 910, the Dirty Air Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If I could inquire upon the time remaining on both sides, please.
The gentleman from Texas has 12 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Colorado has 18.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to defer to the gentleman to run our time down. We have at least one additional speaker, and then I would anticipate closing. So I would defer to the gentleman if that is proper at this time.
I thank the gentleman. We do have at least, I think, 3 remaining speakers, perhaps. So I thank the gentleman, and I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, a colleague on the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this rule and to the underlying legislation, which is an assault on science and reason. Indeed, it is an assault on the very air we breathe. My Republican friends continue to bury their heads in the sand. Last night in the Rules Committee, along with my colleagues Earl Blumenauer and Peter Welsh, I offered an amendment to end taxpayer-funded subsidies to big oil, something the Republican leadership has refused to do. These subsidies have helped BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and Shell make a combined profit of nearly $1 trillion over the past decade. That's trillion with a T. Give me a break. Our amendment would have raised $40 billion that would have gone straight toward deficit reduction. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, our amendment was defeated on a party line vote. That shows exactly where the Republican priorities are, Madam Speaker. A radical redistribution of wealth from the middle class and the poor to the wealthiest people and corporations in the country. Yesterday, our Republican friends unveiled their budget proposal. That budget takes extreme right-wing trickle-down economics to new levels. They want to destroy Medicare as we know it and impose a huge tax increase on middle-class seniors through higher health care costs. They want to eviscerate Medicaid by turning it into a block grant program. They want to cut food stamps, education, infrastructure, environmental protection, and medical research, programs which actually create jobs and improve the lives of American working families. And at the same time, my Republican friends want to provide massive tax cuts to the very wealthiest Americans and corporations, including big oil companies that are reaping billions and billions and billions of dollars in profits each year. The Republican Party wants to increase health care costs for seniors in order to pay for their tax breaks for the rich. Those are wrong priorities, Madam Speaker. As Harold Meyerson wrote today in the Washington Post, and I quote, "If it does nothing else, the budget that the Republicans unveiled Tuesday provides the first real Republican program for the 21st century, and it is this: repeal the 20th century," end quote. For the life of me, I can't understand why the people who caused the recession be allowed to keep everything while innocent workers get the bill. We all want to reduce the deficit, Madam Speaker. How about ending our occupation in Afghanistan? How about ending subsidies for multinational oil companies and agribusiness? How about asking hedge fund managers to pay a fair tax rate? The Republican leadership has made it clear that they are willing to shut the government down in order to achieve their right-wing radical agenda. And if that happens, Madam Speaker, and I hope it doesn't, and I pray it doesn't, the American people need to know that the responsibility lies at the feet of the Republican members of this House. Again, I urge my colleagues to reject this, again, another restrictive rule, and reject the underlying legislation. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My, oh my. You know, we've heard this tirade before. If it wasn't just Republicans in the House, which we've had now for about 4 months, it was something else. The Democrats are looking for somebody to blame their woes on, their tax increases, their over-regulation, all the big spending and the debt. Madam Speaker, we know what it is. If they search quickly enough, they can find out what the American people know. It is pin the tail on the donkey. We know how this happened. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina. Dr. Fox.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Texas for yielding time. You know, our colleagues on our side of the aisle have made it abundantly clear that this bill does not affect the Clean Air Act. What it does is help us rein in unelected bureaucrats who are arrogant and who believe that they have all the answers to what needs to be done in this country. And after listening to the debate over this issue, it's clear to me that nary a liberal here has read a book entitled Heaven and Earth by Ian Plimer, a renowned Australian geologist who takes a science-based approach to disproving so many of the myths underlying the man-made global warming theories. It's a unique, gripping, powerful book that would undoubtedly leave a deep impression on any independent thinker. I also want to mention, Madam Speaker, another book, a Heartland Institute book review of a book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism by Christopher Horner, which highlights some of the motivations for liberals to persist with the man-made global warming theory. And I quote here, Horner tells us, global warming hysteria is truly the environmentalist dream come true. It's the perfect storm of demons and perils and the ideal scare campaign for those who would establish global governance. And he goes on, we're daily told of an alleged consensus on the issue, a concept actually foreign to science. And global warming alarmists want to put disbelievers on trial. They want to control our lifestyles without anyone being allowed to question their cause. And he says, nowhere is Horner more brilliant than in convincing the reader of the odious concept of consensus taking root regarding climate science, where alarmists and the rest of the global warming industry assail scientists and other experts with ad hominem campaigns to discredit them. History is full of efforts to stifle innovation by reference to unchallengeable authority of consensus. Galileo and Copernicus come quickly to mind. Madam Speaker, this shows the arrogance of our colleagues across the aisle and the arrogance of the bureaucrats. They think that we human beings have more impact on the climate and the world than God does, and we don't. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Colorado.
I yield myself a minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
Without objection, I'd like to enter a piece of the record, The Truth Still Inconvenient, by Paul Krugman, April 3rd, 2011.
Without objection.
The gentlelady mentioned science, and one of the expert witnesses the Republicans called for last week's congressional hearing on climate science was Professor Richard Mueller of Berkeley. Now, this is a physicist who had gotten into the climate skeptic game, and I have to say the climate skeptic game is a very lucrative one for people. Anybody who finds a way to deny climate change sells lots of books, gets booked on the conservative talk show circuit, and does very well for themselves. And yet, despite the intensive economic pressure for climate scientists to deny climate change, 99% have stayed true to the scientific method, and the conclusion of the vast majority is that climate change exists. Now, Professor Mueller reported that his group's preliminary findings were that the global warming trend is very similar to that reported by prior groups. Now, this took some courage because of his belief in science. No doubt it hurts his own earning potential. I think he had been doing very well as a climate skeptic. Now he is somebody who has put his scientific principles above his own economic need. What science tells us is not always convenient. Every climate scientist that I know wishes that they could say that there was no danger from climate change, wishes there was no danger from carbon emissions. Nobody wants to be a harbinger of disaster. What a terrible thing to be, and yet they value the integrity of the scientific process. Madam Speaker, I am proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono.
Gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding time. I rise in opposition to this rule and to the underlying legislation, H.R. 910, the Energy Tax Prevention Act. In spite of the title of this bill, it has absolutely nothing to do with limiting taxes on energy or taxes from the get-go. This bill should be called the Dirty Air Act because it turns back the clock by erasing years of advances that we've made in fighting air pollution and curbing greenhouse gas emissions. This bill ignores the clear-cut scientific evidence. Carbon pollution is endangering our health and the environment, and that the need for urgent action to address climate change is indisputable. This bill prevents the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, from acting under the Clean Air Act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, unequivocally linked to climate change. Under this bill, EPA would be prohibited from enforcing common sense. I want to repeat that word, common sense protections against carbon dioxide pollution and other greenhouse gases. Since its enactment in 1970, the health benefits of the Clean Air Act have far outweighed industry's compliance costs. Toxic and health-threatening air pollutants have been reduced by 60%, and the world did not come to an end for corporations. In fact, during this time, the economy grew by 200%. This legislation guts the Clean Air Act's pollution standards and repeals EPA's authority to limit health-threatening pollution. And for what? For what? To protect the profits of the big polluters. And in so doing, this bill repeals important safeguards that are needed to create American clean energy jobs, reduce energy costs, reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and increase our economic competitiveness. We cannot pass this Republican majority's anti-science, anti-innovation bill, and let's not forget, one of their top goals, continuing multi-billion-dollar tax breaks for the oil and gas industry.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
In my book, clean air and the health of the American people trumps profits for polluters every time. I urge my colleagues to vote against this rule and against this bill. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, we are talking about 1.4 million jobs, a lot of cattle, and a lot of bull. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Melbourne, Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Posey.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congressman Webster and I were walking past the rear of the chamber, and we looked at each other kind of funny after former comments and thought we were walking by a set for comedy hour. I mean, I think I really heard somebody allude to the fact that we need more government regulation, and for sure we need more taxes on the oil companies. Those evil oil companies, the answer to all our problems is to tax them more. As if the members of this body and the public is stupid enough to think that at the end of the year, those big oil companies are just going to write a check for an extra $1 zillion. Let's say we tax those evil oil companies another $1 a gallon. They're not going to write the check. We know what's going to happen. They're going to raise the price $1 a gallon. Or, given the corporate greed we sometimes see, round it off to $2 a gallon. Corporations don't pay taxes. Corporations collect taxes. They collect taxes from consumers who ultimately pay the tax. You add a tax to a product, and the consumer's going to pay more. It doesn't pass a straight face test, and I wish we would quit, as the gentleman from Texas said, quit trying to play pin the tail on a donkey. We know corporations don't pay taxes. Consumers pay taxes. Corporations just collect it. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado.
Madam Speaker, when we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts this rule, it will bring up Senate Bill 388, a bill to prohibit members of Congress and the President from receiving pay during government shutdowns. It's my honor to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, a sponsor of a bill to do the same, Mr. Moran.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my very good friend from Colorado. Madam Chairwoman, I do rise in opposition to this rule. The federal government is now 6 months into fiscal year 2011 without a budget. In fact, since this Congress began, we've created no new jobs and, in fact, have put tens of thousands of people out of work. We haven't been able to keep the government operating even. All we've done is to stumble along from continuing resolution to continuing resolution. That's no way to run a government, let alone the most powerful in the world. Sadly, with the clock running, ticking toward the 11th hour of a government shutdown today, which can well happen by the end of this week, agreement on a full-year budget is nowhere to be found. We have no consensus. We can't get together. We can't do our job. And instead, the House continues to serve up far-right ideological proposals, such as this, which pretends that global warming isn't really happening. It will block EPA's modest attempts to limit the growth of greenhouse gas emissions that are endangering the public's health and our children's future. Instead, this body would be wiser to bring up a bill that has already been passed in the Senate and sits ready for consideration in the House today. That's the Moran-Tester Government Shutdown Fairness Act. On the eve of a government shutdown with hundreds of thousands of government employees facing furlough and millions of Americans having to forego the essential services that the federal government provides on a daily basis, it's unconscionable that members of Congress will continue to receive their pay. Having abdicated our responsibility to do our job, to pass a budget, we should not continue to receive a paycheck. It's simply a matter of fairness, Madam Chairwoman. If all Americans are going to feel the pain of a government shutdown, then we should make sacrifices too. The Moran-Tester bill would suspend members' pay in the event of a shutdown. The Senate passed it unanimously, and so should we. And it's the one thing we could agree on now and have signed by the President immediately. That's the vote we should be taking. Now, some have argued for self-centered reasons that the Moran-Tester bill is unconstitutional. But that's simply a smokescreen, Madam Chairwoman. They know perfectly well that the courts decide the matters of constitutionality. And further, we know that the only individuals withstanding before the court would be the very members of Congress who would be voting to shut down the government. So just consider the scene where members of Congress would be arguing...
30 seconds.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman. So I ask the chairwoman just to consider the scene where members of Congress would be arguing before the courts their right to be paid while millions forego their pay. Madam Chairwoman, this body is wasting its time with the legislation we're considering today. Let's demonstrate to the public that we are willing to make the same sacrifice we are asking of others. If we're going to put 800,000 federal employees and our staff out on the street, then we ought to be out there with them. Take up the Moran-Tester bill instead of this expression of ideological extremism that is dead on arrival in the Senate. That's what we should be doing. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, there was a discussion a few minutes ago about Republicans and oil companies and a lot of very interesting comments, and yet many on our side have alluded to President Obama supporting the Brazilian government and people by supporting their oil drilling for natural resources that they have. The President is willing to go down and back up a 2009 commitment to proposing $2 billion from the Export-Import Bank to the Brazilian company that is their energy company. And I'd like to quote, if I can, for just a second, because I think it's very interesting, that he said, "At a time when we've been reminded how easily unstable other parts of the world can affect prices, the United States could not be happier with a potential for a new, stable source of energy." Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert this into the record because...
Without objection.
What he just spoke of was the United States' ability to produce our own oil, so we don't have to look to foreigners to get that done. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Colorado.
I yield myself a minute to respond.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I want to be clear that we can, in this body, take up and pass Senate Bill 388 if we can defeat the previous question. And this will go directly to the President's desk. There is still time. And I think the American people don't know that if government shuts down at the end of the day Friday, as it might, seems increasingly likely, members of Congress will still continue to receive their paycheck. I had a tweet from one of my constituents that said, if there is a government shutdown, are congressmen and senators considered essential employees? I responded that we had a bill, Senate Bill 388, that would make sure that members of Congress don't get paid in the event of a shutdown, but Speaker Boehner refuses to bring it to the floor of the House despite it passing the Senate unanimously. My constituent responded, maybe if the rulemakers had to live by the same rules they created, a solution would come faster. Gridlock is not governance. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
The next sad chapter in Republican fantasy land is being written here today. Last month, they couldn't tell the difference between big bird and big government. Now they insist that dirty air is really good for us. They live in a fact-free zone when the facts don't support their point of view, insisting that big polluters know best and that good science should be ignored. The Clean Air Act for the last 40 years has improved air quality and saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Unfortunately, my home state of Texas is one of the world's leading carbon polluters, and it's also one of the leaders in condoning lawlessness by those polluters. Foul air fouls lives, and especially young lungs. For my 3 granddaughters and their generations, particularly for the more than 23,000 children in my home county who are suffering from asthma, we need to ensure clean air, and that ought to be a given, not just a goal. Science-based decisions, not ideologically driven nonsense, should guide us. I stand with the American Lung Association, with a large number of scientists across many disciplines who call for this bill's rejection. And in its drive to interfere with our health, this same Republican proposal creates the very type of uncertainty that stands in the way of more job creation throughout Texas. Texas moving to become the leading wind provider in the country. Those wind turbines could be built in our state. Solar energy could be expanding in our state, but a climate of uncertainty to which this bill adds even more will interfere with the startups, with the new ideas that could keep us at the forefront of creating clean jobs instead of seeing all those jobs over in China and other parts of the world. This is a bad bill for our economy, and it is a bad bill for the future health of our country as well. I urge its rejection.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to notify the gentleman that I am through with any speakers that we have on this side and would encourage the gentleman to finish his speakers and close and yield back, and then I will do the same.
Gentleman reserved.
Reserve my time.
Gentleman from Colorado.
I'm the last speaker for my side, and I yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to submit to the record a Nature editorial entitled Into Ignorance. Vote to overturn an aspect of climate change marks a worrying trend in U.S. Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Time and time again, we've heard our colleagues cry wolf and make outlandish claims about what the Environmental Protection Agency is attempting to do. But the American people aren't fools. They know that every time the EPA stands up to big polluters claim the sky is falling. That's exactly what happened when the EPA tackled the acid rain problem. Polluters claimed that new safeguards would end their industries, increase the price of consumer goods, cause massive job loss. In reality, acid rain has been dramatically reduced, and the limits of pollution were met faster at roughly a tenth of the cost that industry estimated, all without driving consumer prices up. A recent MIT study even suggests that implementing the EPA safeguards we're debating today will create 1.4 million jobs as companies invent, build, and install new and cheaper pollution control tools and renewable energy. Rather than discussing ridiculous and already disreputable and refuted claims of cow flatulence and other elements that aren't even considered by the EPA, let's discuss science and the facts. Republicans have claimed that the EPA has found carbon dioxide to be dangerous, the same gas we exhale. They say, how can carbon dioxide be dangerous? In reality, the endangerment finding was based on sound science and found that as climate change increases, so does ground-level ozone, longer pollen seasons, more mold allergies. These affect health problems like asthma and heart disease. Once again, Republicans are oversimplifying a serious problem to support their big polluter buddies at the cost of public health. Science will guide us in the right direction, and science is a blind goddess. It doesn't care what we want science to say. What matters is what good science done actually says. The support of this legislation wants to prevent a false dichotomy that somehow protecting the environment would hurt job creation. Instead, the exact opposite has been proven to be true. Since 1970, the economic benefits of the Clean Air Act have been shown to outweigh all costs associated with the law. The economic benefits of the Clean Air Act are expected to reach nearly $2 trillion in 2020, exceeding costs by more than 30 to 1. That's why a number of business organizations representing over 60,000 firms wrote to President Obama and congressional leaders, urging them to support the EPA's mission and to reject efforts to block, delay, or weaken implementation of the Clean Air Act. In their letters, the groups note that studies consistently show that the economic benefits of implementing the Act far exceed the costs of controlling air emissions. The EPA's rule is strictly tailored to only the country's biggest power plants and industrial polluters. These safeguards apply to about 700 of the top polluting power plants and oil refineries, facilities that need new permits anyway under current law. It's been proven countless times that we can protect the environment and public health and grow and strengthen our economy at the same time. To say otherwise simply ignores the facts. Madam Speaker, I want to make sure that no one is misled by the title of the bill we're considering, the Energy Tax Prevention Act. The only amendment that would have actually prevented energy taxes was offered by my friend Mr. Blumenauer and is denied even a floor discussion and debate or vote under this rule. The only thing this bill is taxing is our patience. And we have as serious issues confront America, including a government shutdown, the majority seems intent on legislating by false bumper sticker slogans. Madam Speaker, when we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to consider Senate Bill 388. I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous materials immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question so we can debate and pass a bill that actually does something useful, ensures members of Congress don't get paid during a shutdown of government, and has a real chance of being enacted into law and signed by President Obama. I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the gentleman from Colorado for this wonderful discussion and debate that we've had here today. Madam Speaker, the bill we're discussing today does not weaken the Clean Air Act or the regulation of air pollution. It does interfere with the EPA's long-standing authority and it does not interfere with the EPA's long-standing authority to protect the environment. In fact, as I stated in the very beginning, it simply clarifies that the Clean Air Act was never designated, designed, or shown to be for regulating greenhouse gas emissions. Thus, we would be removing authority that the EPA has not had, should not have, and would not have because this Congress will not pass what is called cap and tax regulations. By gaining control of the government spending and eliminating government regulations, the private sector believes that the Republican Congress can be here for the interest of not only the taxpayer, but also to make sure that jobs, investment in this economy, in the future are very bright. I applaud my colleagues for coming down to help debate this bill. Madam Speaker, I encourage a yes vote, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it.
Madam
the ayes
Speaker,
have it. Gentleman from Colorado.
On that, I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adoption of House Resolution 203, if ordered, and approval of the Journal, if ordered. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House now holding its second series of votes for the day, beginning with this procedural vote relating to regulations. That'll be followed by a vote on passage of the rule, followed by a journal vote on the record of the previous day's deliberations in the House. The underlying bill would remove the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The rule calls for an hour of debate equally divided. Should that pass, we expect general debate to follow, along with deliberation of over at least 12 amendments, and then more votes. The Senate, by the way, is also expected to deal with the issue of the EPA and their regulation authority. The Senate expected to vote on at least 4 amendments on the same issue this afternoon. Those amendments unrelated to the legislation they're working on. Right now, senators are in a quorum call, waiting for senators to come to the floor. The Senate working toward completion on a bill supporting small tech-related businesses. And you can see that on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. Procedural voting in the House on the rule for debate on EPA emissions regulations. A short time ago, I spoke with a reporter who talked about the legislation's current status and what's likely to happen with it today and in the future. An environment reporter at Politico. Well, we've got the House today working on a bill taking away the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases. Why is this a priority for House Republicans?
Well, they've been calling this EPA regulations that are coming forward from the Obama administration job killing, and they're going to, stop all sorts of manufacturing and energy production, and just not a really good regulatory policy to be having at a time when energy prices are so high. So the Republicans have made this a top priority. The Obama administration counters that these regulations are actually pretty effective, pretty efficient, and won't cost too much, and also will have the added benefits, they say, of reducing air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, this issue isn't limited to Republicans in the House. It's also on the Senate's agenda for today. What are the prospects for passage of those proposed amendments in the Senate, which, of course, is led by Democrats?
The first and leading one, which is sort of a counterpart to the House bill, will probably get a majority. It's going to get all the Republicans and a handful of Senate Democrats, too. It won't get 60 votes, though, and that's the crucial threshold to get it added to the small business bill. And then there's several other amendments, and none of them I don't think will come close to 60. Probably won't even come close to a majority of 50. And then ultimately President Obama has threatened to veto a lot of these proposals as well.
Well, the White House has also weighed in on this debate as it relates to the spending negotiations that have been going on for the past several months. What has the administration said about this effort to impose on the EPA's regulatory powers?
Well, they've kind of danced around it as it relates to the budget and the negotiations that are going on to try and fund the government for the next 6 months. Republicans in the House want to actually stop EPA from spending any money on these EPA regulations, and environmental groups have really gone AWOL and gotten very upset with the fact that the Obama administration hasn't explicitly said that they would veto a spending bill if that rider was included. The administration has said they would veto a standalone bill like the one that you're seeing voted on today in the House, or even this amendment that's going to be voted on from Senator McConnell in the Senate. But when it gets to the nitty-gritty details of the budget, the administration has been a little bit more careful about drawing a clear line in the sand, and that's upset some of its allies on the left.
So will this bill pass here in the House today?
Yes, it will. It'll easily pass in the House. I think we've always known that it was going to be a slam-dunk vote. Really, the only question is how many House Democrats go along with the Republicans, and I think the number's around 15 to 20 Democrats from coal and oil-producing states who are likely to vote with the Republicans on this bill.
So what's the next step for the measure then?
Well, after that, it'll probably die here in the Senate with respect to just a standalone bill. There's no way that that bill's going to move through committee or in the Democrat-controlled Senate. So we kind of are at a standoff. I mean, the Republicans will have clearly made their case that these regulations are politically toxic for Democrats, and they've certainly been able to force some Democrats to take tough votes. I think you're going to see campaign ads over the course of the next year that any Democrats who voted with the EPA or with the Obama administration will probably see their names and the fact that they support it. I'm sure they'll call it a gas tax, the Republicans will. But, for countering that, the administration is under a Supreme Court order from 2007 that orders them to actually go ahead and regulate for greenhouse gases, 2005. And so the Obama administration is following what the Supreme Court told them they had to do. And these regulations will go forward, and those, of course, will be challenged in court by industry as well.
Darren Samuelson is the senior energy and environment reporter at Politico. We thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And after this procedural vote, we are expecting a vote on passage of the rule, followed by a journal vote. In the meantime, negotiations are continuing this afternoon on an agreement on stopgap spending for the federal government. Current temporary funding runs out on Friday at midnight. So without a settlement, the federal government will shut down, something that hasn't happened in about 15 years. Government offices will close. The IRS will not process paper returns. Nearly 800,000 federal workers will be affected. If you are planning to come to Washington to see the cherry blossoms this weekend, to make side trips to some of the museums this weekend, there's a chance that they will be closed, also with the government shutdown. According to Politico and White House spokesman Jay Carney, President Obama had a good conversation with House Speaker John Boehner and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid this morning when he called them separately to get an update on negotiations. Press Secretary Carney told reporters on Air Force One today that there are indications that progress is being made on a budget deal.
On this vote, the yeas are 266, the nays are 158. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman from Colorado.